Two teenage killers have had their identities revealed by a judge as they face life behind bars for the brutal murder of Brianna Ghey. They have been named as Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe. The transgender 16-year-old was stabbed 28 times with a hunting knife in a horrific attack on the 11th of February after she was lured to Linear Park near Warrington. We'll have more on that at 11 o'clock in our bulletin. Now back to Jake in the studio.
Well, there we go. We have heard that the killers of Brianna Ghey have been named by the court. We covered that appalling crime very extensively. Previously, they were known by letters rather than their actual names because of their age, but the judge has now apparently decided to release their identity to enable us to know who perpetrated that appalling crime. Matthew, we covered Brianna here on the show. An absolutely appalling murder, completely premeditated, committed by people who were under the age of 16 at the time. Do you think the judge has done the right thing naming these individuals today?
I think probably the judge has. I mean, what strikes me just looking at the photo of the two found guilty is just how young they look, isn't it? I mean, because even though you hear that a killer is, or killers in this case, are so young, when you see the picture, it really brings home to you. And I think in terms of the discussion we were just having about a divided society and about a society which, you know, is about sort of exploiting difference, which obviously was sort of one of the factors in this case. It just reminds you of how we need to sort of come together. We need a better society. I find it just hugely, hugely depressing.
And one thing we may learn a bit more now at the time when the case was going on, we were discussing it here at talkTV. One of the things we discussed were whether these killers, we asked the question whether these killers had been radicalised by the internet. And Stella, again in America, we've seen Mark Zuckerberg in front of a congressional committee discussing what restrictions should be brought in relation to online content. I think it's actually very relevant here in the UK in this case as well. Do you think in response to this we may hear more from the government about seeking to regulate the internet, which is a sort of a wild space, and enabling individuals to become radicalised, as may has happened in this case?
I think it is definitely very important when you're talking about children, people who are underage, that there are separate rules from adults. There should be more restrictions on people under the age of 16 on how they use social media, the kind of data that is gathered. There should be more access allowed for parents, especially when they're involved in cases like this. And let's remember, these are extreme cases. This is not something that's going to happen to the vast, vast, vast majority of teenagers, the vast, vast majority of children and young people. They will never even come across anything related to this. But when there is a situation where a case does go to court, where a crime has been committed, then social media needs to cooperate with police, they need to cooperate with government, they need to open up these accounts, we need to know exactly what's happening, we need to know what content were these people exposed to. That's not to say, of course, Jake, that just because a teenager is going to be exposed to some kind of content that they're going to become a murderer. I believe these two young people, there is probably some kind of psychopathy going on there. These are not normal young people.
Well, I think particularly the boy, both of them actually were identified as having autism as the trial went on. So there's obviously various issues. But let's also, I think the reason this is so shocking isn't just that a beautiful young girl was murdered by these two individuals. Well, it's because it happened in a sort of leafy Cheshire village. We've spoken a lot today already about, you know, attacks in cities in central London, whether it would be Bristol, Nottingham, or in fact, you know, any other city in the UK.
I went to school about 20 miles away.
This sort of small community, which you know well, Matthew, will have been shocked to its core by this appalling murder.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that brings it home to you. You know, when you grew up, as I did, sort of 20 miles away in the village where you went to law school later on, you know, it just reminds you of how now people have access to so much, frankly, hateful information that it sort of adds to any underlying issues that bullying's always been there in the broadest sense. I mean, bullying, and now, of course, you can you know, learn more, radicalise more, but also, of course, because you can make content and post content, that becomes part of it. And that's just what's so depressing. So I hope as a nation we pause for breath, we learn some lessons, and we reflect on how we can be a better society.
Yeah, and let's hope that we do now have the opportunity to try and learn some of those lessons. And let's also hope for all of the parents involved, whether it's of the to individuals who were found guilty of murder, or Brianna's parents themselves, that they get the opportunity now to move on with what I'm sure will be a very long grieving process for all members of the family, because it's not just Brianna's parents and friends who are victims, it's also the parents of these two young people. I just say, as a parent myself, you can't imagine a situation where your child might commit a crime like this. They will have been so shocked. And at the time when we were discussing on the show, we learnt about how, you know, the perpetrators had returned home. They were teenagers. They'd sort of gone back and hidden in their bedroom. These are children. That's why it's so
Which the picture underlines
shocking.
so much, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's so shocking. I mean, child killers, children killing children, is mercifully still very rare in this country, but I do think it captures the public imagination, Stella, don't you?
Yes, it does, especially when you're looking at the evidence that were submitted to the court. You're looking at the texts that these kids sent to each other, the manipulation, the days after days of manipulation that went on, and the way that these kids then afterwards, the very cold way in which they hid their crime, which makes you really second guess yourself. But we must not forget that human nature is by and large positive. Most people are not aggressive. The vast majority of people would not be able to comprehend being aggressive towards another human being. We know that in the past, during wars, most soldiers would not even fire their guns. We know that it's very difficult for a human being to hurt another human being. It takes a certain type of psychopathology and a very certain type of situation for a human to be aggressive. So if there is any message to take from this for me, Jake, is to not be suspicious about everyone. When these things happen...
That would be the worst thing to happen, wouldn't it?
Yes, exactly.
You know, not just this, but other crimes.
But I just go back to that core point there. There's got to be, you know, Brianna can't have died in vain. There's got to be a moment of reflection by Parliament, by parliamentarians, by people in government, which says, look, what was the online harm, the online content that motivated
good
this
can
sort
come
of
of this. I mean, you'll remember, I'm terribly sorry because I can't remember the name of the victim, but there was the young woman who was killed for being a goth in Lancashire.
Yeah, Sophie Lancaster.
Sophie Lancaster, that's it, yeah, absolutely. There was a play about it by Julie Hesmanhow was in it. You know, and the mum there has done so much work about, you know, going into schools, discussing difference. You know, in a way, we've got this problem because the internet also means that we, you know, if we are a bit different, if you're into something that not everybody else is into, you can now connect with people around the world who share your passion. But then that difference then makes you stand out and can lead to problems. So let's hope that good can come of this.
Well, as you mentioned it, Matthew, Sylvia Lancaster did a huge amount to campaign after the appalling murder of Sophie Lancaster, which took place in my constituency in Bacup. So I remember it only too well. Look, we'll keep bringing updates on the Brianna Ghey case as they come from the court. We'll throw to the newsroom because in the last half hour, a judge has named the two teenagers who murdered 16-year-old Brianna Ghey. They are Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe, both 16. Brianna was stabbed 28 times in a frenzied attack in a Cheshire park in February last year. Their killers previously were known as Girl X and Boy Y. During their trial, because of their age, they're being sentenced at Manchester Crown Court. But Brianna's friend Ella told talkTV she doesn't want to focus on them today.
It should all be on Brianna because the two people that took her life, they don't need to be remembered. They shouldn't be given that fame because they don't deserve it. It should all be focused on Brianna.
Well, you know, you see from looking at her friends reacting there how raw this still is, but also, Matthew, as you say, how young they are.
Absolutely, but what a great point there from Ella. I mean, you know, completely. Let's remember Brianna today. Let's not glamorise the killers, because actually, that's one thing that glamorising killers becomes an inspiring factor. That has been, particularly in America, it's often that the people have glamorised other people who their school shootings and things. So, you know, let's remember Brianna today. Let's remember Sophie, and let's remember that good can come out of such appalling tragedy.
What I find the most inspiring in cases like this is when particularly the parents or the friends of people who have been caught up in tragedies like that, when they become campaigns in their own right and they dedicate their lives, because you can imagine how difficult it must be.
And it's so compelling to hear their testimony is so compelling.